Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Charlie. This is my friend Charlie Vignola. I'm Lukas Kendall. We're here to talk screenwriting and related adjuncts. And we'll jump right into it with Charlie. You wanted to talk about the Netflix news, and Netflix laid off like 150 people.
Yeah, I kind of got calls from some friends this week about this. It was a pretty big development. Netflix cut close to 150 jobs, decimated their animation department. A lot of high-level people got let go. This was all part of the news of the past few weeks, with Netflix projecting losing several million subscribers, considering an ad tier to their service to try to get more subscribers. Um, there's been a lot of kind of consolidation amongst the studios, and as a result, there have been just a lot of executives let go, development executives, production executives that have been let go across the business. So that's not good for people who work in the business as executives. And so, and in addition to Netflix, there's big goings on at Warner Brothers, as I'm sure some of you might know. Warner Media was purchased by Discovery. I'm not sure how that happened, but essentially a bunch of executives have also been let go from Warner's. And David Zaslav, who's the head of Discovery, apparently is just a no BS kind of guy who's coming in there, and they pulled the plug on the Wonder Twins movie that they were developing at Warner Brothers, which was apparently a priority project for them. They are developing more children's programming, which could be a good thing, but he's been very aware. And I guess when the deal was done, when Discovery brought Warner's, they also bought $55 billion worth of debt. So one of the first things that David Zaslav is doing is trying to
Yeah, that can add up, right?
Yeah, he's trying to cut billions of dollars in debt. But he wants to increase. I heard he wants to increase the movies that Warner releases to about 20 to 25 features a year theatrically.
But they're all Dune movies, I heard.
I don't know about that, but I think that's at least that's
Dune Part 25.
No, you want to see more theatrical movies. Obviously,
Sure.
During COVID, HBO Max and Warner's released a lot of what would have been feature films to HBO Max, and now David Zaslav wants to, pump up the number of theatrical features every year. 25 would be a big number, because I mean most studios are not making 24 theatrical features anymore.
So about the Netflix, I read an article, and now I forget every detail, but I retain the gist of things, which was that so Netflix started out as they would mail you DVDs, and then they started the streaming service, so you didn't need to mess with DVDs. You could just somehow on your television have this Netflix app. You could watch all these movies, and because they were ahead of the game, they were able to license all these awesome movies from the studios, and they had this awesome catalog. So people found it like, hey, I'll spend $13 a month on this. And then
it was a great deal.
Great deal. Yeah. And then eventually they realized that the future was in the streaming, so they kind of phased out their DVD service. Does that even still exist?
I think just like there's, I believe, still one Blockbuster Video somewhere in America. I think there might be one last person who's still capable of renting DVDs on Netflix. It might be a service that like the very small number of people avail themselves of, but Redbox is out there in all the supermarkets and Walmart, so people have that available to them. But you're right. I mean, that's how Netflix began, and up until very recently, it was nothing but upside, nothing but growth.
Well, but there's more to the story. So Netflix they were ahead of the game because they were innovative, and most of the studios, like with streaming, was like, who cares? They were still into their thing, theatrical home video. And so Netflix built this great service, got ahead of everybody else, but they were smart, and they realized that eventually everybody else would pull back their catalogs to launch their competitors, which is what's happened. We have Warner's has HBO Max, Paramount CBS has Paramount Plus, Disney has Disney Plus, and then at the bottom, Universal has Peacock, which does anybody pay for Peacock?
They lost $2 billion last year, Peacock. Yeah.
So anyway, this will look good when I'm trying to get a job at Peacock and somebody finds this video. But so Netflix, what they realized that, okay, we're going to make our own content. And the first show was House of Cards, wasn't it?
Yes,
So they
huge
went
hit.
to Fincher, and they went so high end. So what they had basically is there was an executive in charge of the original programming because nobody there knew how to do it. So they hired somebody. It's like, ma'am, you know how to do this. Just make some great shows and make some and change the perception of us as a place that people could actually watch a great TV show.
Yeah,
Because otherwise it was like, what? It'd be like, hey, Charlie, you can see a TV show in my garage. It's like, but I don't get TV shows from your garage. I get them from TV. So they had to change the
right.
paradigm, and they did. And then they had, I wish I had researched this, but I can't remember the woman's name, but the executive in charge was brilliant, made hits, but she also spent a lot of money because part of development is you spend a lot of money. You go down roads that don't work and you have to cancel things, and you have to get super expensive filmmakers, and you have to overspend to get them to take a chance on your platform.
They threw a Brinks truck at David Fincher and
Yeah.
the creators of that show. And you're also one other huge development with Netflix was allowing all of the episodes of a series to drop at once.
Yes,
Nobody had ever
we
done
take
that
that for
before.
granted. That was
That is
totally
a
innovative.
huge seismic change in the way people
So,
watched.
so Netflix had this golden period where they still had like all the Friends episodes and all these catalog shows.
The Office,
And and they had House of Cards, and they had Stranger Things became an unexpected hit, and I can't remember what they are, but they had their own hits too. So they really had the best of both worlds. And then as they lost the catalog stuff, they needed to ramp up the volume. But what I read from this article, and I forget all the details of who the people were or where I even read the article, was that like internally they started having a fight. Like, why are we spending all this money on this executive who spends a fortune on these shows when we can pick the shows ourselves?
right.
And they sort of got that delusion, like, how hard can this be? So they needed the volume. So they were just like spending money on everything. And then they started to realize that they could get these great hits just from like having junk.
Well, yeah. And they, in addition to spending like billions of dollars a year on development, which was again way more money than you were seeing anywhere else, and they had to, as you pointed out, because they were losing all their programming to all the studios that decided to launch their own version of Netflix. But early on, when Netflix was first starting to develop shows, they were known for not giving a lot of notes to screenwriters. In fact, with House of Cards, one of the benefits, or one of the allures for David Fincher and the creators of that show, was that they could do what they want. Like you wouldn't have like network interference, which is a big thing when you're developing shows for ABC, NBC, and CBS. Is you're noted to death. You're given so many development. But that wasn't the case at Netflix.
It's such a contradiction, because I think one of the consequences of that is that filmmakers got really lazy. They're like, hey, I can make a lot of money just selling this bottom of the drawer idea to Netflix,
Right.
And then not really, oh, no, it's okay. I'll do what I wanted to see when I was 12, regardless of whether what I wanted to see in 12 would actually make a good TV show.
Well, but now what I've heard is that has changed. Netflix
Right.
used to not give a lot of notes, but like of late they have. So that has changed as Netflix expanded and they hired many more executives. You got to do something when you're executive.
Well, and I would assume the executives need a learning curve to figure out how to run it, how to have shows. I mean, it is a very interesting thing. My wife and I were just a couple months ago, like we were looking for something to watch on Netflix, which is an experience that we've had for years. And we were just clicking through. And do you remember, how in like movies where they go to a fake movie inside the movie?
Yes.
There's a marquee behind it. It's like, it sort of seems like a movie. It's like action cars. It's like, of course.
Yeah.
It like we saw like 14 things on the menu in a row on Netflix with big movie stars. And we're like, that's a movie?
Oh,
it was all garbage.
It became a cliche where you're spending as much time like flipping through all the features on Netflix as you do watching anything, right? Because there's such a deluge of programming. You'll spend 35-40 minutes just browsing through trailers.
Just, there was no curation to it. It was just so now I think, and that's what caused a lot of circumstances happen at the same time. They lost the Russian market, Ukrainian market, obviously.
Yeah.
At the same time that people were the pandemic was ending. It's still not ended, and people were not as housebound as they were. So yeah, they lost a lot of subscribers, and it looked bad to Wall Street. Now they have to lay off a lot of people.
Well,
But
I was going to say another thing that Netflix has done, which affects screenwriting, which is the thing we talk about, is shorter seasons. You know, you started seeing that on
I like
HBO
that.
and on a lot of the cable channels. You started seeing, instead of 24 episodes, you know, like the show 24 had 24 episodes in a season. It just started to be 13 episodes, or maybe 10 episodes, or maybe less than that. It's good for Netflix because shorter seasons means they can have more seasons and more new shows to put out there, because again, novelty, you want to create more and more new material. It's not necessarily good if you're a writer, is that if you're working on a network show, let's say you were working on, you know, CSI in the old days and they were doing 24 episodes, or the X-Files, you're doing, you know, a 24 episode season. Well, as a writer, you're on staff for 24 episodes. You're getting paid for every one of those episodes for the year. But if you're working for Netflix and you're on a show that's only doing, you know, 8 or 10 episodes, you're only getting paid for those. And the network is also locking up your contract for a period of time, so you can't work on other shows. So you're, as a TV writer, maybe getting half the pay.
It's been very bad for writers, and it was part of the contentiousness of the last guild negotiation.
Yeah, and another thing, in addition to shorter seasons, Netflix pays you more money up front, which sounds good, but they got rid of the idea of residuals. And, you know, some of you might have heard that term before, but residuals are how people used to get rich in TV in the, you know, 70s and 80s and 90s, because they would show these episodes of shows over and over and over again in syndication. And you would get a paycheck as a writer that would, you know, over time get lower, but it would just go on forever. Netflix said, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to pay you a lot more money up front, but that's all the money you will ever.
It was a buyout. And then the last interesting business thing about Netflix is that they inverted the paradigm. In the old days, the studios wanted to have 7 years of a show, because then they could syndicate it and it would kick off billions and billions of dollars, like in perpetuity.
It was like 100 episodes is what you needed to get into syndicate.
Yes. And then in like Welcome Back, Kotter would be on after school on syndicate, on UHF all the time, and Star Trek, and all the famous shows that you can think of. They were produced initially at a loss, because if they got a hit and got it to that magic number, then it would just be a money-making machine. But Netflix found internally their algorithms that it wasn't helping people subscribe if they had 7 years of a show compared to 3. So they were better off making 3 years of a show and then making 3 years of a different show to get more subscriptions. In addition, the cast and creator fees got super high the longer the show went on, because people, you know, it's like, hey, I'm the star of your show. You want me to keep working on this hit show? Then you're going to have to, no more paying me peanuts. I want 7 million. I have 3 million an episode, or whatever it is. And so
they would renegotiate contracts.
Right. So Netflix would just say, you know, they would just make the 3 cheap years, and then they would move on to the next show. So it took away that potential of you as a creator having this gold rush of having the faucet of money that comes from having 6 or 7 years of a hit. So Charlie, you and I know this, maybe the audience does or does not.
No, but I mean, that's the kind of thing. I think if you're watching our show, you know, we're trying to give you a little bit of a glimpse of the kind of discussions that people in the business are having, because, you know, these are major tectonic shifts in the business that are affecting, the ripple effects are affecting everyone across the board, whether you're a development executive, a screenwriter, a filmmaker, visual effects artists. You know, all this stuff is changing. And right now the changes are going on at every single one of the major studios in all sorts of ways. So obviously it also affects you, the screenwriter, trying to figure out, well, what should I write? Who should I try to, you know, send it to? Because it's all changing, you know, dramatically, very quickly.
But I do want to talk for another minute about the idea of curation and the idea of the executives being like an editor. I'll tell you a story. So I read Marvel Comics when I was a kid. Did you? Probably.
Oh, forget it.
Yeah. So for me, the modern golden age of Marvel Comics was that period in the early 80s when the X-Men got big, and they created a lot of the innovations that let them really grow their audience, but they also ended up cannibalizing their audience.
Right.
But it starts in the mid 70s. Marvel was nearly bankrupt, and it was very dysfunctional. And they hired this young executive, Jim Shooter, to be an editor, and then he became editor-in-chief. And he was very controversial because he's like this 6'9" monster who started writing comics as a 13-year-old. And like, I guess his people skills were lacking when it came to hand-holding finicky comic book creators, because a lot of them didn't like him. And they didn't like him because he would often say no. But he came in there in a time of utter chaos, and it was like the books were late, they were terrible. And one of the things that made the books terrible is that the editors were often the writers at the same time. They were writer/editors. And they were just in their own little fiefdoms. They were just doing whatever they wanted that amused them as creators. And he kind of like it made discipline. He said, no, every book from now, every comic book is going to be some kid's first ever comic book.
Right.
Every comic book is going to be understandable. And you're going to build into the storytelling, even if it's stupid exposition. Like, that reminds me of how that time I learned to fly. And, so you actually learn, who are these people? What do they want? What are their powers? What are the weaknesses? It gets seeded in every book. And it became a little annoying to longtime readers. But if you were that kid, then you could read X-Men 202, which was the first issue I ever bought in 1985. And I could figure out who is Nightcrawler, who is Wolverine, who is Rogue. What
right.
And he was hardcore about that. And he was hardcore about saying no writer is also going to be an editor. They're going to be editors, and they're going to be writers, and the editor is going to be in charge of the writers, and I'm going to be in charge of the editors, and we're going to have actual discipline, and we're going to have a structure so that we don't have Spider-Man do this one crazy thing in this one book and this other crazy thing in this other book that is incompatible. We're going to have these stories work together.
So coherence and continuity became the watchword.
And because he was not like a warm and cuddly person, a lot of people bristled and a lot of people loathed him. But he had a blog, jimshooter.com, which is super interesting, where he just blogged his memoirs more or less, and then for a couple of years, and then he just stopped. I don't know why, but he ended up getting screwed by both people, because the creators hated him because he told them what to do, and the business people hated him because he actually tried to take care of the creators. He was like, no, you're going to give them royalties, you're going to give them like benefits, and you're going to take care of them. You're not going to just abuse them as contractors the way you have. So he ended up like getting hosed by everybody, or it's possible he just tells stories in a self-serving way. But a very interesting person. And I wrote him once an email, and I said, this is like, your memoirs would be like a movie. And he wrote back and said, I have no interest whatsoever in having my life story be a movie.
I always thought that the relationship between Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko, as they created the original Marvel universe in like 1963, would make for a very interesting.
There was a Blacklist script about that.
Oh, okay. I was going to say it's inherently fascinating.
It is
history of these guys, because they're three working class. I don't know if Ditko's Jewish, but certainly Kirby and Stan Lee were. These sort of Jewish working class kids that created the modern mythology that sort of took over all of entertainment as you now see it. And even back then they had their issues. They weren't getting along. There was all kinds of fights over who actually created what. For some of you who don't know, there was a Marvel method of writing comics, and the short version of it, from what I understand, was Stan would come in with the equivalent of a log line. He would sit down with Jack Kirby and say, here's my idea for the Fantastic Four, but it was like, a couple of sentences maybe, and Jack, you go draw it, and
that's an extreme case. The Marvel method specifically, in DC, they had a full script, so the writer writes panel 1 is going to be this, and the dialogue is this.
They break it down by panel.
And the Marvel method was that the writer would basically loosely give them a synopsis. And then the artist would draw it, and then the writer would go back and put in the dialogue balloons.
And put in the captions.
Put in the captions. So it was a way for for one writer to write 7 books, which is what Stan had to do.
Because he wasn't writing 7
Yeah,
books, because
but
the
what's-
artists
yeah.
were based.
And there was also there was a funny story in Shooter's memoirs where when Stan was still there and a little bit involved in the 70s and Shooter was very young, like one of his writers was pissed off that he wasn't allowed to do some storyline or whatever. It was a very like complaining writer who left this like manifesto about how horrible everything was and like put it on their door. And the story is that like Stan came up to Jim Shooter and said, "Did you see this?" And it's like, "Yeah, Stan, I'm on top of it." And Stan's only comment was, "This is very well written. Get this guy some more work."
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
But it's interesting what you were saying about how Jim Shooter was running Marvel Comics is kind of how Kevin Feige
exactly.
has run Marvel Studios, which is the envy, obviously, of the entire business, because when he first decided to try to create interconnected series of movies, it seemed like a fool's errand. It's hard enough to get one movie made. How are you going to make like dozens and dozens of movies that are all working in concert and interconnected? And because there were many Marvel movies made before Kevin Feige came along with Iron Man. There was the Ang Lee Hulk, and there was Blade, and there were a number of
variable quality.
And it was kind of like the DC universes now, right? Which is they were all over the place. Some movies were interesting, some movies were not, but there was no coherent idea of how to pull them all together the way the comic books worked. I mean, that way of storytelling was sort of unique to Marvel back in the 60s. So when Kevin Feige suggested, let's try to make movies this way, that's a huge roll of the dice, a huge gamble. Now it's paid off. In retrospect, it was brilliant.
Yeah.
But at the time, there was no guarantee that would work.
You and I have both been the writer and we've both been the executive.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, in my time, when I was running Film Score Monthly, I was the editor in chief and I had all these, we were doing journalism, CD reviews, but principle's the same. You're finding talented people, you're identifying what they're good at, you're giving them assignments that play to their strengths, you're giving them feedback, you're giving them guidance, and you're sometimes drawing the line. You're saying, no, I'm not going to publish that, and you can't do that. One of the things Jim Shooter famously did is he insisted that Jean Grey die as the Phoenix in 1980 because her character had destroyed a solar system, and it was, for him, that was such an unforgivable sin that the character needed to be punished for the comics to be moral.
Right, you're talking about the X-Men for some of you.
The X-Men, the Phoenix.
Grey and Phoenix.
Yeah, it's a little complicated.
The big story in comics.
The point is that the editor-in-chief at the last minute put his foot down and said, no, you can't do this. You have to change it. And the creators hated the changing it. They hated him. They hated that he made them change it. But in the end, they realized it was a better story.
Right.
And that happens all the time. Roddenberry was a very interesting character. And he really did create Star Trek, but a lot of what we think of as the most meaningful and consequential parts of Star Trek were not created by him. There were other writers who did the original series who invented the Klingons, who invented a lot of the banter between Spock and Bones. There was the movie that when Roddenberry was personally in charge of Star Trek in the later years, it ended up being an over-budgeted disaster because he was indecisive, he was ideological, he was an alcoholic, he was on drugs. I mean, he had a lot of personal problems. He was an eccentric person, and he kind of believed his own publicity that he was a genius and that everything, and that like he was the great bird of the galaxy. And so, and he was just very eccentric. So
it sounds like you're saying he birthed the universe, but all the things that we think of as the more classic elements of Star Trek weren't necessarily from Roddenberry.
Most of, the movies were set on their track by Nicholas Meyer, who did Star Trek II, who directed it and basically ghost wrote the script because they had like 5 different incompatible drafts, and Nick Meyer needed in 2 weeks to put something together they could shoot so that ILM could do the effects in time. So the movies came from Nick Meyer more or less. And Leonard Nimoy, who directed Star Trek IV, and the Next Generation there was really a television writer named Michael Piller who fixed it, and there was like Ron Moore and Brannon Braga. So Roddenberry, he when he was hands-on in charge of Star Trek Next Generation, it was a disaster. Like he was borderline senile. and like they fired a million writers. This is common knowledge for
Okay.
Trekkies. It's like bedtime stories. But there were still some episodes of Star Trek where Roddenberry, there was like a 3 or 4 year period where Roddenberry had been kicked upstairs, but he was still there and he was still living and he was still paying attention to the stories, where Roddenberry would say, no, you can't do that. I don't, because the crew is, we've solved those human problems by the 24th century. And the writers would hate it. And they would be so pissed off that he didn't let them do their story that they thought was so great. And then they found an even better solution. I wish I could think of some examples that come to mind from classic episodes, but there were several episodes where Roddenberry said, no, you can't. Like there was a famous Star Trek episode where a crewman dies and leaves a kid behind. And the kid is so sad that the kid recreates his mom on the holodeck, and they have to get the kid to stop using the holodeck and accept that his mom died. And that was Ron Moore's first Star Trek episode. And Roddenberry said, no. That's by the 24th century, even if we're kids, we know how to grieve. We have evolved as a species. And they're like, argh! And then they thought, wait a minute, what if it's an alien entity who feels so guilty about accidentally killing the mom that the alien entity then impersonates the mom to try and comfort the kid? And they're like, that's even better.
Interesting.
So it's interesting. Yeah, it is very interesting that even when Roddenberry was sort of out to lunch and he was in ill health, there is something to be said for that executive who at the last minute says, no, you can't do that. You got to think of a better idea. And they're like, we can't. And then they do, or sometimes they don't. And there are probably some times where they say, nope, no, we're putting our foot down. That's how it is. And then everyone tries to get rid of that person above them who's telling them no. And then they go and do their own thing. But it's like the Beatles just were never as great apart, were they?
No, and it's an interesting, the creative dynamic tension on television between sort of the showrunner who's sort of overseeing the general direction and focus of the show and all the individual staff writers who are all, working towards that common goal. They might have individual ideas that might be incredibly cool, but that might not work for the entirety of the show. And so the showrunner basically says that won't work, that won't work, that won't work. And if you have a good showrunner, then that's probably a good thing. Then there are bad showrunners, right? A lot of times in the middle of a show, a showrunner will leave. I know that on Veep, Armando Iannucci, was created the show and ran it for a number of years. And then David Mendel from Seinfeld came on in the latter years. But you know what? That was an example where he was a good showrunner who was actually able to end the show very strongly and pull all those elements together. But sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes the showrunner leaves and they get some hack to come on later in the season.
Well, I don't know if it was a hack, but True Blood at some point,
Alan
Ball left, and we were like, what the, it was.
But
it was
that happens for a lot of, that happens for a lot of
things. Yeah, showrunners are. But then again, The Walking Dead, they went through Darabont, and then didn't they go through Glenn Mazzara, and still the thing's a juggernaut.
Yeah. Frank Darabont was for the first couple of seasons. It was just the first season, really. And it's still been running 10 years later. So that's interesting. I haven't really written television, but the idea of the writer's room has always seemed very interesting to me, talking to people in the writer's room about how they work together, how they break stories.
Yeah. I'm a good executive, and I say that, I don't care if it sounds like I have a swelled head. I mean, I have since I was 16 years old.
If you do say so yourself, you're good at organizing.
Just ask me, I'll tell you.
To pull towards a common goal. No, but that's the thing, right? You need a captain to steer a ship.
You need a captain. You need that person at the top who just when stuff goes bad, the person goes, it's okay, relax, I'll talk to them.
Yeah,
it'll be taken care of. And
well, I mean, and if you're not an author of a book or a painter of a painting, any other endeavor artistically is usually a group effort, whether it's music, movies, TV, plays. So you need to have somebody who's quote unquote the boss overseeing and making sure that everything's running towards the common goal.
You need the executive when you're running out of money to go back to the director and say, does it really need to be raining for this scene? And
Yeah.
sometimes the director will say, absolutely, yes, I cannot. And you say, okay, but other times, they'll say, no, actually, it'll be better if they're inside because of this, that, and the other reason. And it's okay, we just saved $100,000.
Well,
So,
you've heard the term bottle show, right?
of
A bottle
course.
show.
Yeah, I
Okay.
wrote one.
So for some of you who don't know what that is, on TV series, sometimes when the budgets are getting too high and they need to save money and they need to find some way to cut costs, they do what's called a bottle show.
Yeah,
And a
they're
bottle
trapped
show,
in the elevator.
yeah, the bottle show is basically a one location. The example of a micro budget movie. They're trapped. You're in a plane for the whole episode,
Yeah.
or you're in the offices, and you
It's
don't leave the office.
that Fly episode of Breaking Bad. It's
Yeah.
Magnum PI and Carol Burnett in the elevator. It's a bunch of things.
Yeah. So
The Clips show.
and by the way, like that's and then if you have to save money from the bottle show, then you do a clip show.
Oh, those are the worst.
The clip show is the lowest of the low. It's not even a real episode.
Yeah.
It's like a character will be like hit on the head with a frying pan and then suddenly has memories of the
I know,
show.
we're old enough to remember these. They're so bad.
Yeah, but a bottle show would be like, that's a creative exercise, right? It's like, well, we need to do a show we don't leave the offices, or we're in one location and we got to figure out how to make that dramatic. Most bottle shows probably aren't great, but some of them are kind of interesting, if you can figure out how to make that work. And it's, it's a good creative exercise. At this time when, some people try to break into the business of screenwriting by writing low budget thrillers. Well, I mean, if you can figure out how to do that, and it's tricky, right? To not leave a location for 90 minutes and try to do that. I remember I had an idea called Open House. It was a thriller, and it was like real time, 90 minutes of a young girl who's showing an open house in a suburban neighborhood one Sunday afternoon. And there's a guy who comes in, seems interested in the house, and you quickly realize that this is the previous owner of the house who, because of a nervous breakdown, lost his job, lost his wife, lost the house that this woman is selling. And he determines that, by the end of the day, she's dead because she's selling the thing that, his whole life was surrounding. So it's literally like a chamber piece for these two people. And obviously people are coming in and out of the open house. Is she going to be able to get away from this guy, what have you? And I'm like, that's not a bad idea for sort of just a setup for like a very low budget thriller. But then I forget, I saw a thriller called Open House that was on one of the streaming services. It wasn't the exact same idea.
Close enough.
But it was close enough. I'm like, I don't need to write that idea. But, it was about creatively, how do you come up with situations where it's just like a very tight circumstance and there's just, a few people. And then years earlier, I had an idea that was like a thriller all set on a plane, and it was a woman, sitting next to a guy on the plane, and she quickly realized the guy she was sitting next to was a serial killer. And he was like on the plane, and it was an overnight flight. It was, a midnight flight, and he was killing people on the plane. And how was she going to say anything? And then the movie Red Eye came out, and I was like, oh, well, that's the idea. So I don't need to repent. But
good executives are essential, and that's why they get paid a lot.
Yeah,
It's like the only power a director really has is the belief from the stars that the director will make the stars look good.
Right.
If the stars turn on the director, then you might as well just get a different director. But if
and you'd be surprised how often that happens in this age where stars do have all the power to get a movie greenlit. I mean, it's not the director really so much that gets things greenlit so easily. It's really the stars that there's a handful of like actresses and actors where if they decide to do your movie, it gets made. Hundreds of millions of dollars are marshaled to make that movie.
And the executives who have the relationships with those directors who can get the stars that's why they're so valuable, because the directors love it when these executives are smart and they're trusting, but they're also like, I like to be challenged by people who are smart because I don't want to make a fool of myself. So that's why, like, I just asked you to read a script. I want you to read the script before I start sending them to people, because you're a friend and you can say, look, this is cool, but you got to fix this. This is not going to work. Because if someone says, look, this is not going to work, I want to hear why.
Yeah. And we would all like to have those sounding boards. And that's why I think we've talked about this in previous shows. You need to find your own personal development system composed of whoever you can find that's going to give you good notes, and they could be civilians, friends, and family. They can be other professional friends, or even other aspiring screenwriters. But you need to find people outside of yourself that can give you a reality check, on your material, and tell you where it's slow, where it's confusing, where it's boring, and you might not like their comments, but at the very least you have to like listen to it and glean from it what's important and what you do want to do. Because let's face it, I mean, if you write a first draft screenplay, it's not a shooting draft. It's never going to be a shooting draft. So you're going to need some sort of feedback as to like what's working and what's not. And sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees because you're in the middle of it. It's too subjective. You can't be objective. So getting other people to read it, at least they're going to give you their, hopefully, you got to find people who will be honest with you.
Yeah.
Give you their 2 cents about like, what needs to be improved.
Hard.
Yeah. Do you, I have my group of people, like, who are some people that you give your material to these days? Do you have like a small circle of people other than,
I have nobody.
present company?
I have very few people, and I often have to use the paid services.
So your wife doesn't read your material? Like my wife sometimes.
My wife she's just so busy. She's got so much work and takes that stuff. We got 2 7-year-olds, and the thing, my wife is when she reads something, she doesn't have the kind of analytical brain who can say, hey, that second act really sad. She'll say, I didn't understand this part, but and she used to read all the time before we had kids. So she's a huge reader, but it's just not her personality to like give notes on a script.
Yeah, I mean, even when I give it to, say, my wife, or I have a 21-year-old daughter, I'll ask leading questions. So it might not be she's going to tell me specifically, or they're not going to tell me specifically, in the most sort of pointed, direct, focused way what the problem is. But I can ask leading questions about, well, did this make sense? Was this clear? Where were things sort of? It's kind of the way that test screenings of movies go in Hollywood. There's at the end of in Hollywood, we have these test screenings of movies when we first get an assemblage of a film together, and it's before the sound and the visual effects and the color correction. It's all done. It's like, is it hanging together? Is it working for an audience? So we have a screening for a full audience, and then they pick randomly a couple of dozen people to stay behind after the screening, and there's a guy who talks to them for like 45 minutes. Asking a series of questions about what they just saw. And because again, these are pure civilians, have nothing to do with the movie. They're just giving their honest assessments, but you need to guide them in terms of like what you're asking questions about. Did the movie move too fast, too slow, just the right pace? If it moved, too slow in areas, where were those areas? What were things that confused you? What were some of your favorite scenes? What were some scenes that, you don't think needed to be there? And like the hive mind of these 24 people, you'll get weird comments, of course, but it's the job of this person who's overseeing the
audience. The audience may be dumb, but they're never wrong. We have to pause and then resume.
To circle around, the person who's running the test screening, a lot of people make fun of the test screening process. Certainly the filmmakers do, right? Because they don't want like all of they don't
want to change their movie because of Betty from Petulia.
But it's interesting because both the filmmakers and the studio executives both use the test screening for their respective perspectives, their points of view. If a filmmaker wants to keep like a scene in that he thinks works, he'll hope that the test screening is going to validate what he wants to do. And the same thing, the studio executives are like, you can't release the movie 3 hours. It's just too long. We're going to have to find ways to cut it back. So they'll use those comments there. But it's the hive mind is useful. I mean, there are very few times where the director's cut of a movie is genuinely better. There's sometimes there are, right? And then there's sometimes you've seen them and it's like, ugh, that's not very good.
Right. It's like when you finally see the deleted scenes on the DVD, they're deleted for a reason, almost always.
Yeah. And again, there are a few times, like I will say that James Cameron's, director's cut of Aliens, I think is definitely better than the cut that was theatrical, because there are key things about character and theme that got left on the cutting room floor in the original theatrical cut that enriched that movie. But it's not always true. Most of the time, it's not true. Yeah.
Betty from Petaluma. I hate it when I misspeak. Want to do some log lines?
Yeah, let's do that. That'll be fun.
All right. So here's what we're doing, audience. So we've talked about this website called The Blacklist, and sometimes we critique or review the log lines that they tweet about, which got scored 8 or above. And instead of doing that, what I did is they also have a section of the website. This is all public stuff called Top Lists, which is the top rated ranked scripts, and you can sort them by genre. So I picked the top 12 horror scripts on their site as of this morning, figuring that this would be an example of something that actually happened where, let's say our boss says, hey, I'm interested in doing a horror project. Go on the Blacklist and look and see if there are any interesting horror projects. And if there are, read them and tell me if they're any good.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the top 12 horror scripts, and let's see what we would think if we were just this unnamed intern.
Okay.
So first is ESL by Christopher Wisu Kim. I hope I pronounced that right. When Molly Cho's mother is diagnosed with terminal cancer, she rushes to relearn her first language, Korean, so that they can reconnect before she dies. But as she progresses in her studies, a long dormant evil is awakened.
I mean, that's pretty vague. I wouldn't really, other than the Korean angle, I'm not really sure what that even means. She's learning her mother or family language, but I don't know what that means in terms of what the horror aspect is.
Yeah, it seems to me like, and we've talked about this before, that things get elevated by these services when they have a strong element of diversity, because that is a very noble thing. I mean, you and I both agree that diversity is important. And I think what happens, it's just obvious. Look, if I was an intern and I was not trusting my ability to judge scripts because I'm just, I don't know, because maybe too many times I've said this is really good and someone says, what are you, an idiot? It's terrible. So I say, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what anybody's going to like. But if I brought them this and said, look, this is a really noble cause, this, it's got this interesting use of Korean culture, that at least is not disputable.
Yes. And again,
so I'm not an idiot.
Just to clarify, because we've done this a couple of times on the show, this is not about the relative quality of the script itself. Obviously, the script itself,
we haven't read it.
Could be brilliant.
Yeah.
This is not about that. This is purely about how the log line hits a development executive who's just looking through the data, trying to find things that are going to pop out and grab our attention to make us want to read that material, solicit that material. Because I mean, attention is the important thing here. How do you grab somebody's attention? And if it's not focused, direct, specific, and novel enough, we're not going to go through the trouble of contacting the person and getting the script.
This one, it seems that it's obviously about assimilation, immigration,
yes,
ancestry, but I don't know how. It would be good if it was connected to an occupation or to a particular aspect of Korean culture, which I know nothing about, except that Squid Games was pretty awesome.
And also, this is a tiny thing, but like you have the character's name in the log line. You don't need the character. It's a very small.
Well, they do that because you can see that actually is useful, because Molly, she's Americanized. Cho, her family's from Korea.
Yeah, except we do learn Korean as part of the rest of it. Okay, let's see. White Wedding by Jessica Grace. A destination wedding for the daughter of one of Washington's most likable politicians takes a bloody turn after guests accidentally ingest a hallucinogen that brings dark impulses to the surface. So this is climax with a wedding. It's that who is it? The filmmaker, not Gaspar Noé. It's a bunch of people at a dance academy who ingest a hallucinogen.
Oh, I didn't know that.
They all go nuts.
This is
a movie called Climax. It's basically this, but instead of it being a wedding, it's a bunch of like young dancers who come together at a house, and they have a get together, a party, and they ingest a hallucinogen, and they all wind up going crazy. So this
I did not know that. This could be cool if it's it sounds like farce where all these shallow people go to a wedding expecting a wedding, and it ends up being like murder and catastrophe and blood spurting. I mean, it could be a good social commentary thing. Who knows?
Yeah,
it does say comedy thriller.
The destination wedding as a topic or subject matter for movies, I've seen a lot of them. Paramount for a while had a comedy, like a found footage comedy about a destination wedding. I don't know if it ever got released, but it was something that they were developing at the time. And I was like, that's a funny.
Well,
that's a funny
it's a good concept because you're taking these weird people and putting them together in an interesting place. So it can be a lot of conflict. You want dramatic conflict.
You want to take the next one?
Yeah. High Falls by Bubba Weiler and Zane Pace.
Yeah.
In the secluded mountain town of High Falls, New York, a closeted gay high school graduate with little prospects believes he sees a UFO, leading him on an obsessive wild journey through the underbelly of the Catskills. So is this gay and Jewish?
I don't know. I'm not sure why
I don't understand
why the closeted gay part is important to this particular thing, other than to just give a little more detail to the lead character, because I'm not sure how that affects
this could be like there's a really interesting funny voice here, because I don't understand what the movie is, but I might check it out just to see if there's like a funny voice.
Okay. Let's see, The Damned Amongst Us.
And congratulations, writers.
The Damned Amongst Us by A.S. Angerson. Let's see. The morning after he and several friends are attacked outside of a club, Elliot discovers something supernatural may be to blame, now with the police chasing him. An insatiable hunger and memories of a life he tried to forget at every turn, Elliot must confront Domingue, the mysterious and dangerous man who turned him before the sun sets.
So it's like a backdoor vampire movie.
Is that what it is? A werewolf or a vampire story of some kind? But I'm not sure what the novelty of that idea is. So a guy who leaves a nightclub gets bit by a creature and he turns into a creature, and that's kind of that's like half of an idea to me. I'm not sure what the other half of the idea is.
Yeah, doesn't quite hold together.
Okay, you want to do Myth of the Given?
Yeah, by Jeremy Foley and Sarah O'Reilly, Irish. In the 1950s, rural New Mexico, a strong-willed doctor follows her intuition when she meets a young Native American woman and her child in the woods and ends up experiencing a supernatural phenomenon that spans centuries. I have no idea what that is.
I noticed in a lot of these horror movies, right, it ends with this sort of very vague description that's supposed to be a stand-in for the plot or the premise, but we don't really get enough details for that to grab us.
What we're noticing is that there's the premise of something from a diverse group or culture, and then it ends up with the weasel cop out.
Yeah. It's almost like that's a pattern I'm seeing for a lot of these log lines.
Well, it is because scripts are hard, concepts are hard, and these are amateurs on their way. I mean, somebody in here could very well have an awesome career. We'll be begging them for a job.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Faceless by A.R. Parslow and J.K. Hansen. All right. Nickel Fellowship placing writers, so the expectations are a little higher. In the wake of a case that ended in tragedy, an FBI profiler relocates to the Pacific Northwest, where local authorities seek her aid in the hunt for a cunning serial killer who psychologically manipulates pawns into carrying out his crimes. We've read this before. We've read Yes, we've read this exact log line.
We could have. I honestly don't remember.
We did.
Do not remember.
Because we commented on the fact that it seems that all profiler serial killer stories are set in the Pacific Northwest.
I was just going to say, they're all
that's a common. I'll say it's a trope. It's a trope, right? Because it's like, well, Seattle is dreary and it's rainy, and that's a natural kind of like spooky atmosphere, and psychologically manipulating pawns into carrying out his crimes. Like, again, we said that was like potentially interesting, but still a little vague as to like how that plays out. But again, we found, all right. You want to do Leech?
Sure, by Michael Aaron Kane. Congratulations, Michael. You don't deserve this. I mean, you don't deserve us right now. On a weekend getaway into Minnesota Lake Country, two buddies see their friendship deteriorate when one is bitten by something terrible and becomes something worse.
Variation of the other idea that we just
okay. It's but bitten by a leech, as opposed to it's a werewolf
by
movie,
something terrible and becomes something worse. I mean, that certainly seems like another werewolf monster idea.
Yeah, but the movie's called Leech, so I guess they're bitten by.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
So writers, if you want to stand out, have the supernatural thing connect to the protagonist whose life circumstances suggest a journey.
Yeah.
Right? That's the secret.
Yes.
That's the secret.
Right.
So
yeah.
if it's
Well, I'll give you a bad example. The Nutty Professor is not a horror movie, but the Nutty Professor is a shy, nerdy, unconfident person drinks a potion. It's Jekyll and Hyde, right?
Yeah.
And he becomes the Buddy Love character, which is overconfident, arrogant, theatrical. It's the exact opposite of what the person's Achilles heel is at the beginning of the story, but goes too far.
All right, here's another perfect example. The movie Liar Liar, famous high concept comedy. A guy has this like curse or something and has to tell the truth, but he's a sleazy lawyer. So, okay, the sleazy lawyer connects to somebody who has to tell the truth. So that's the connection that makes a logline work.
Yeah. No, that's
Whose
true.
Turn
okay, I'm mine from Mud. Okay, and this is Dave Pilson. Dave, congratulations on this. As the dead inexplicably rise and reunite with their loved ones, a grieving man grows tired of waiting for his deceased wife to return and begins searching for a way to bring her back himself.
That's actually
so. What that means, there's been a number of TV shows I've noticed that had this premise, which is like people from the dead, for some reason, spontaneously coming back to life and being reunited with their loved ones. So this is kind of a trope in sort of supernatural stories and TV. But this is kind of that plus another strange element, which is, well, everybody else is being reunited with their dead loved ones. How come I'm being left out of this?
I actually like this.
Figure this out.
I like this. This was just when I was complaining about these things. I like this because you know who the guy is and you know what he wants.
Right.
And it's an interesting spin. Usually it's a problem when the dead inexplicably come back to life and then go around eating brains. But this is interesting because he wants the opposite. He wants his wife to come back as a zombie.
And what's key is that it is a horror comedy.
Yeah.
Let's be clear. This is the premise here is supposed to elicit laughs. So this is the variation on the trope of everybody else's dead loved ones are coming back and being reunited with them. And one poor schlub is like, how come I got left out? He's trying to figure out how to get his wife.
I would check this one out.
There's a twist on that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to do Bornless?
The Bornless by Timothy Stevens. Reeling from the loss of her baby, a woman seeks out an occultist claiming to know an obscure ritual that could bring her baby back.
I feel like
it's somehow soft. It
is, but like, isn't that what Pet Sematary? It's that kind of idea. It's a woman's baby is stillborn or a baby dies shortly after it's born, and somebody is like, I want my child back so much I'm willing to make a Faustian pact to get.
This one's not resonating because it's what we expect somebody to do. The last one is somebody wants the opposite of what we expect. So it's intriguing to meet that person to go, why does the person want, what would that be like? So this would be more interesting if it's like the woman seeks an occultist because she needs to kill her baby who she suspects is possessed. I mean, it's something that's like, whoa, you don't kill baby. Something that has that kind of
there's a couple of
nature to it.
There's a couple of key things to me that are a little off about this. One is it's a trope, which is, a dead, it's literally the other idea, a dead loved one, and you want to bring them back. Now that is half of an idea.
Yeah.
That's one half, which is somebody died I love and I want to bring them back. The other
half. It'd be interesting if it's like if the woman has to bring back her favorite kid inside the body of her handicapped kid or something.
Yeah, the trick of these things is if you're going to start with the trope, if you're going to start with the cliche, if you're going to start with what's expected, the second half of the log line has to be what puts the spin on it. And I'm not sure here what the spin is because it's not clear. It just simply says there's an obscure ritual to bring a dead loved one back. Well, that's great. Again, that's half the idea. But what is the other weird thing about the second half of this idea or the novel thing that makes you go, that's cool? So a woman loses her baby in childbirth and does X to bring the baby back, which leads to this unexpected twist. The unexpected twist part of it is the part of the idea that grabs you. So, all right.
It would be interesting if there's a movie about like a woman who tries to use the occult to like cure her Down syndrome child or something that touched a social taboo, but we don't need to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. So Boneyard by Phoenix Black.
That is the coolest name.
That is a great writer
I hope that's a
name.
real name.
I hope so too. Phoenix, God, that's a great name. Phoenix Black, man. Okay. A stuntman's son sabotages his father's affair. A sex-addicted star falls in love, and a grieving stagehand finally faces his demons literally. 3 intertwining stories and genres explore masculinity amidst anti-Asian racism, love and loss on the set of a martial arts horror show. Get Out meets Haunting of Hill House. Yeah, I mean, there's too much going on.
Yeah, this is a college paper, not a script.
It's too cluttered. It's too convoluted. It's alluding to more than it's giving you in terms of what the idea is. And it looks like it might be an anthology thing, or, I guess it's an anthology.
These were all features. So.
Okay. So yeah, it's just, unfortunately, I think the log line is too cluttered for me to get a clear read for what it is. Although it does point out anti-Asian racism, there is a sort of a modern, diverse element to it, but it's a little too inchoate. You want to read Disfigure?
Sure, by Chris Cranach. Hannah recovers from an accident that left her body broken and her mind blank, but her sanity is further tested while seeking the origin of a blood-curdling scream. Okay, that's half a log line.
Again, it's a
misery without Kathy Bates.
Yeah, it's an amnesia story, which again, like, is always a good setup for something, right? It's like a person wakes up.
It's a bottle show, yeah.
Right. It's you wake up with no memory, and then something happens, and the something here, at least from the log line, I don't know what the origin of a blood-curdling scream means in relation to a person recovering from the accident. They're not connected. I don't know. I think that's kind of a too obscure of a, too vague of a log line there. Okay. The Seattle Play by Meg Duell. A talented but overlooked lead guitarist and his ambitious singer-songwriter girlfriend plot a path towards success by murdering bandmates in this retelling of Shakespeare set against the backdrop of 1990s music scene. What is the Shakespeare?
Is it like Macbeth and Lady Macbeth here? I don't know.
The Seattle Play. Maybe it would be nice.
Well, that would make sense because they call people call it the Scottish play.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. So it is. It's some sort of horror setting, horror version of Hamlet.
No, Macbeth.
Seattle during grunge.
Macbeth.
Or Macbeth. Sorry. Maybe. I mean, yeah. I mean, it doesn't immediately grab me, but I guess it's kind of a novel way to sort of spin a Shakespeare story. But yeah, I mean, I don't know.
All right, so if we're the intern and we've done this exercise, there was one that I said I would check out. I already forget what it's called. But I have to go back.
Yeah, the one about the comedy, the dark comedy about the guy trying to bring back his wife when everybody else is getting.
Yeah, I would check out that. The truth is that, like, anybody could be safe in assuming that not one of these is something you could walk in and sell to anybody right now, because for most important reason, like, if they're so great, why are they just sitting here?
Right.
Did you
see a movie? Did you see a Blumhouse movie with Vince Vaughn called Freaky?
No.
Do you know what I'm talking about, though?
I barely.
Some writer came in and I don't know if it was he had a full script or he had a pitch, and he was pitching it to the Blumhouse people, and it was a shy, nerdy high school girl and a Freddy Jason type serial killer switch personalities, and he called it Freaky Friday the 13th, and that became the movie Freaky. That's high concept.
Yeah,
right.
That's a great idea.
Basically, a serial killer and a prospective victim switch bodies. So now the most deadly serial killer is in the form of this harmless looking 17-year-old girl who's like now murdering her way through her high school, and the nerdy girl is now in the body of this 6'4" scary looking serial killer, but she's now stuck in that body trying to convince her friends,
Yeah,
no, it's me.
That's hilarious.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the idea. It's called Freaky, and it was actually, a funny horror comedy that was released during COVID, so it didn't really get the traction it should have. But like, that's an example where if you pitch that as a horror comedy, I'm like, done. Like, that's
I feel like I personally, not you, but I personally have probably been unduly harsh to these writers and their scripts and sort of the general concept of trying to be a writer and come up with something. And one thing I just want to say, that as harsh as we may be speaking about these people we've never met and their scripts we've never read, like, sort of on one hand, get used to it because everybody does it, and a lot of them will behave much worse than we do. But on the other, it's just the process. I mean, I've written way worse scripts than this, and I remember from my own experience that it's just the process.
Way worse log lines than this. We were not reading the scripts; we were reading log
lines.
About
yes, excuse me, thank you. But it's just the process that you're trying to teach yourself how to write. So you come up with some sort of idea, and you've never written a first act, you've never written a second act, you've never written a climax, you've never written a character. So it's all a process of learning by doing. And as much as everyone says you should outline it, like I never used to outline because I would find it in the writing. I mean, I'm talking 15 years ago, 10 years ago.
And I will say this, and you see this a lot. I'm on some Facebook screenwriting groups, and people are always throwing up their log lines for
I'm on it.
Comment on. And here's the thing: like, what they're really mostly putting up there isn't so much a log line. They haven't written the script yet. A log line is after you've finished writing the screenplay.
Well, some people advocate writing them beforehand because then at least you know you're writing something.
But here's how I would differentiate it. It's about the premise.
Right.
A log line is a formal term for what is the one-line description of a completed screenplay in the body of of coverage, which is like a book report on a screenplay. So the log line there has a specific purpose, and that's what a log line means. If you're asking me, what is your script about? It doesn't have to be a log line. It has to be, what is the premise? What is the concept of your idea? And that, before you start even writing your idea, that better be concise and interesting and simple, and you should be able to describe it to somebody in 1 or 2 lines, because if you can't, and you go and you write that, you spend 4 to 6 months writing that screenplay, and you still can't describe it in a couple of lines, you're sunk. Because again, it might be great. All these scripts, let's say they're all great, that is good, but it doesn't matter if it's living on your hard drive if you can't get it to me, the guy who's looking to read your screenplay. And the only way that I'm going to be able to tell that I want to read that screenplay is if your core idea, your premise, is so captivating and interesting and focused that I'm going to go through the trouble of contacting you and getting that screenplay from you. So you have to think about that before you sit down to write your screenplay. Like, is my basic idea interesting enough? It's if your log line is, a woman loses her, 17-year-old honor school student and has to navigate the loss of her son. That could be the most wrenching, ordinary people kind of idea in the world. But based on that, I'm going to be like, I don't know. I mean, it could be anything like that. That concept alone might not grab me. Now, granted, if you already have a reputation as a writer, if somebody else is recommending the script to you, great. But if you're a first-time writer looking to get some sort of attraction or attention to your material, then the premise, the concept has to be interesting enough. And therefore, before you start writing the screenplay, you're thinking about, well, what am I going to spend my time writing? I have a handful of ideas. Which one of those ideas is going to be the one I'm going to work on? Because you better hope that idea is interesting enough in and of itself to get some stranger to contact you to read your material.
My advice is, when you're looking at those list of ideas, is to figure out the protagonist whose journey most connects to that idea.
Yeah, I mean, this is a
because otherwise you've got yes, but people don't do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, for 2 seconds, seconds talk about that. Like when you're thinking just of the basic idea of something, right? There's a premise, and then the character who's going to experience that premise, and the character's starting position or status quo should be something that's going to be illuminated by the premise, right? You know, in other words, if you're already a big movie star and you're going to be engaged in a story where at the end of it all you're going to be a big movie star, nobody cares, because there's no journey, there's no change, there's no progress, there's no evolution to that character. But it's got to be about somebody who's got an Achilles heel, got a weakness, got a problem, got something that going through this adventure is going to help you address that internal problem that you're struggling with, one way or another. It could be
Rosemary's
positive.
Baby
Yeah.
has to star Rosemary. Can't be from the doctor's point of view. Can't be from the the husband's point of view. It's
Right.
Rosemary's Baby. Yeah.
Right. That's true. So whatever your idea is, at a very basic level, it should at least do that. And like we've talked about on previous shows, sometimes you start from character, sometimes you start from premise. I usually start from premise, and that's probably because I've worked in the business and I know what it's going to take to get the attention of somebody like me. So I try to come up with like what is the idea, the premise, the concept that is so intriguing, fascinating, inherently interesting, and then figure out like who's the best character to focus on in that premise, right? And that's if you put those two things together, that should yield the most interesting movie idea and ultimately a log line that'll grab somebody like me. But as you were pointing out earlier, it was just like, you know, in 1920s Germany, a grocer is bitten by a creature and experiences horrible, horrible nightmares. That's half of an idea. I'm not sure what that is. I understand the setting, but I don't understand like, well, what is the thing that's happening there? I don't understand, you know. But if you say, a shy Jewish grocer in 1930s Germany resurrects, or creates a golem to help defend his neighborhood from the Nazis, but winds up, unleashing horrors, much worse than the thing he's trying to fight, through the golem. It's like, okay, well, then I understand. It's like, you're trying to do the right thing and it gets out of hand, and the setting is kind of interesting, and at least there are elements in there that I can sort of see, which is that's the letting the genie out of the bottle, or the sorcerer's apprentice.
Yeah, you want those human, those things that we all, those universal human things, like now I'm not saying any, these are just coming off the top of my head. These are not me, but like, what if I marry the wrong person? What if I don't love my kid?
Right.
What if my parents, I have to put them in a home, but I just want their money, like, there are just so many things that happen that when people do them wrong, they look like cliches, but we all are human, and we all go through the problems of childhood and coming of age and sex and marriage and having kids and growing old and having older parents. We all go through these things. So you want to take these universal human things that we deal with, or unique things that only certain people deal with, being adopted, having a disease, being, or whatever, having an unusual job, or having a family tragedy. You want to find these things and bring them out in a way that's real, that's empathetic to that journey, and you want to externalize them with fiction. And
well, again,
on
the most basic level, finding and falling in love with somebody, and endless variations on that theme. Recently, I'm sure you guys have seen in the news this story about it was a corrections officer who helped a prisoner escape. These two people who were lovers, and they, he pretended to, have like an illness, so she got him out of the prison, but it was all a ruse to just help him escape. And the two lovers basically tried to get away. There was a manhunt to find them. Eventually, they did. She was so distraught, she killed herself. This is tragic. But this just happened like a week or two ago, and guaranteed there's probably 3 or 4 writers and producers that are already working on this as an idea, because there's something inherent in there, which is like, a lovelorn corrections officer, a prisoner that she's, overseeing. They develop a relationship. They plan this escape. It's like a Bonnie and Clyde kind of thing. And then unfortunately it leads to, tragedy when she realizes that they've been caught, and she, her life will never be the same. But it's a normal human thing, which is, I want to fall in love with somebody. And under those circumstances, it's different, right? Your Achilles heel is you want to fall in love.
Yeah,
Oh my God, I'm in love with the guy that is a prisoner in my prison.
Those human things are what suggest the intrigue to make somebody say, I want to read that. And it's, yes, I fell in love with a killer. I finally had a baby, but it's the son of the devil,
Oh yeah. And this is another one, and this is up for grabs because this is a true story. It's something I saw in like one of the something online. It was a true story about the romance that developed between a Black American nurse and a Nazi officer during World War II. It was, Black nurses were a minority that were going overseas to sort of help with injured officers during the war. And she met and helped, like Florence Nightingale, a wounded Nazi officer, and the two of them fell in love. Like, to me, I'm like, I want to know more about that relationship, because like, talk about like the ultimate combination of sort of like, falling in love with a Nazi, a Black American nurse, already sort of somebody who's marginalized by society. And how did that develop? It's just so inherently filled with drama and conflict and tension and all these elements that are still relevant to today. If you told me that, like, some great drama writer was writing that romance, I'd be, yeah, true story. I'm curious. How does that work? So that would at least grab me, make me want to read it. Anyway, get someone's attention with your idea. That's important. Just make sure.
Yeah, which we've said, and we try to apply it to our own work. Somebody on Reddit said, hey, when are you guys going to give your log lines? And I said, well, I did in the end of the last show. And the person said, well, I didn't watch the whole show. I don't blame you.
Okay, yeah, here's like an idea I had many years ago. It was a comedy called Irresistible. It's Irresistible. You've always heard these, like, love potion number 9 kind of ideas. Like this lovelorn guy who basically has a girl he's in love with, but she doesn't require quite the love. He's kind of a scientist who's trying to figure out a way to create a chemical to make her fall in love with him. And the problem is, it makes every other girl in the world fall in love with him but the one he wants. And be careful what you wish for, it might come true. Imagine the practical reality of every single girl craving you at the same time, what that would do to your life. It would not be a dream. It would be an absolute nightmare. And the
You're an idea machine. Why didn't you write this?
Yeah, again, because I worked in the business for so long, and you come up with literally hundreds of ideas, things you can never do anything with. But I think that's the key. If you're going to be a writer, just keep generating. And you just brought it up. Just come up with high concept ideas and figure out ways that the lead character in the high concept idea, faced with that dilemma or that peril or that challenge or that trauma, is going to go through the most interesting arc as a result of that. A claustrophobic has to go someplace high, or an agoraphobic has to go out of their apartment. I remember it never got made, but there was a movie. The whole premise of it was two agoraphobics in an apartment were observing a woman in her apartment across the street, and thought that she might be in some trouble, and they were trying to figure out like how to deal with that problem, because they were so scared of leaving their apartment. So the whole hour and a half comedy was about how are those guys going to save that girl because they can't leave their apartment. And I'm like, that's a funny idea. It's like, I don't know what the mechanics of it were, but I mean, in terms of a premise, that's a funny idea, because that you're bringing up something that's inherently like an incredible phobia to this person, but how do they overcome that phobia to to be with the person they love, or to save somebody outside? I guess there's a little rear window to that as well, right? Like rear window wasn't a romance, but if somebody wanted to do like a rear window variation, that might be kind of an interesting way to develop something. I always had this idea to do like Home Alone as a drama, like literally a kid is
Yeah.
left behind by his sort of like working father or working mother or something like that, or ne'er-do-well parents, and there are bad guys that want to get something that's in the house left behind by their ne'er-do-well parents, and the kid has to defend the house. But it's terrifying. It's not funny. It's scary because the
And
kids
they
literally
just do. There just was a Home Alone premise movie done as a sort of like an action horror.
Was it Babysitter?
No,
Was
it
it
starred
the McGee movie?
I
Oh, okay.
don't recall.
But by the way, that is something you can do. Take a drama and turn it into a comedy. Do a gender swap. We'll have to do this maybe next week or something like that. But like, how do you generate ideas? How do you generate high concept premises? Like, what can you draw from? How do you mix and match ideas? What are things that are going to grab the attention of people like us? And there are things you can do. You don't have to just sit there and wait for the muse to hit you. So maybe we can talk about that next week. That might be kind of fun to do.
You're way better at that than I am. I mean, I feel like my strengths are more for the developing of the idea once we have the idea.
But you have to start with the idea. So where do you find those ideas? How do you grab them from the ether? And
you just got to keep going. I mean, to all these folks who we criticize, just keep writing. Do the next one.
We're not trying to criticize because we're trying to be idiots. We're trying to, honestly, we're even being very mannered in terms of our reaction, because sometimes development executives, when they're going through this stuff, can be, insufferable when they're kind of like reading these lines and like talking amongst themselves, and they're not quite, they're not nice, because again, you're deluged with this all day long. I know when you're an aspiring writer, you're just like, why can't I get somebody at Steven Spielberg's company to read my script? Why won't they just read anything that's submitted to them? And it is really a question of numbers and time, because it's 50, 60, 70, 80,000 screenplays are written every single year. There are just not the resources and the people to be able to process that much material. So we can't just open the doors to every single script, every single pitch, every single log line. That we couldn't do it. We couldn't process it. So there have to be systems that help us figure that out, and that is managers, agents, lawyers, other executives.
Contests and coverage.
Exactly. Things
sorting.
like that.
Gatekeepers. That's why they're gatekeepers.
But anyway, well, this was fun, as it always is. This was fun. And again, questions, comments, and ideas, please leave it in the comments section. We would love to see what you're interested in.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, audience.
Okay.
See you next week.
Thanks, Lucas. See ya. Thanks. Bye.
Thank God that's over. No, I'm joking.